Association of Business and Industry, or at least representing the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. They're here to talk to us about LA 23, which is the new strategic plan from LABI. The two people who are going to be speaking are Beverly Haydel, who I believe is the project manager for LA 23, and Marie Centanni, who is a communications expert. Please give them a warm welcome. And remember that we're going to ask questions in the second half of this, but I'd like everyone to remain respectful, raise your hand. One of our two ladies will call on you, and try to keep your questions on topic. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Julia. It's nice to see all of you today. As she said, I'm Marie Centanni. I'm the founder of Centanni Communications out of Lafayette, but I do a lot of work with LABI. I've been consulting with them for about 6 years. But about a decade and a half ago, I was a reporter here at WAFB, and so I was actually on the board of the press club and used to schedule these luncheons and attended quite regularly, and very much value the discourse and civic engagement that you guys provide. So thank you for coming today, and we're eager to share this plan with you. So LA 23 is a roadmap. It's a roadmap to a specific destination for the state, and that is that by 2030, if we follow these plans and these recommendations, we should be where we believe we're supposed to be, which is a top-tier economic leader in the South. And what that means is that we're competitive, that we are successful at providing opportunity to all communities across the state, that our young people are given the gift of preparedness to seize that opportunity, and that we're just doing things right to stop what we call the brain drain, the best and brightest leaving our state, the jobs leaving our state, the cost of things like high crime, high insurance, causing people to think twice about whether they want to live here for the long haul. So I'm a mother of three. I have a 15-year-old, I have a 14-year-old, and I have a 12-year-old. So they are knocking on the door of the age where they're going to go off to college, they're going to start their life, they're going to chase their dreams. And my mission personally is to make sure that they can fulfill their dreams here in Louisiana. And so for me, that means, are my children prepared? Are they ready, again, to seize that opportunity that's in their backyard? Are we as a state successful at making sure that opportunity exists for them here? And in the end, are they safe? Is their community affordable? And are they healthy? And what we saw when we engaged consultants through this process of forming the LA 23 strategic plan, the answer is no. The answer is that Louisiana is not doing a good job at those things compared with our neighbors. Yes, there are good job announcements. Yes, there's good economic news. But when we compare ourselves with our peers, we're still at the bottom of the good lists. We're still at the top of the bad lists. And it's time to change that. Saturday, we have a historic election. We'll be electing a new governor, new statewide elected officials across the board, new legislators, new local officials, new mayors, new attorney general, new DAs, new sheriffs, A to Z. There is change coming in terms of the people who will be empowered with making decisions whether or not to improve our state. So we're hoping that with all this change, we give them a little bit of a map that says, here are some things that will put us on the right path to make sure that we're doing the right things for our children. So the plan is specific. The plan gets us to a specific destination. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of plans and agendas out there. You're going to see some alignment. You're going to see some things on our plan that maybe you've seen from PAR, Cable, Committee of 100, Pelican, some of the economic development organizations. And that's good. That means we all agree on some things that they're a good idea. What our plan does is say, these are steps we need to start taking now if we want to get to this destination by 2030. So it's not a wish list, it's a to-do list. And I'll invite you, you all have a copy of LABI's magazine, Fifth and Main. This is a publication we put out twice a year. It's a statewide business publication. It's got industry news, it's got some good stories of businesses large and small and things that are happening in the state. Within this issue, we have published the LA23 plan. We also have a legislative scorecard if you want to take a look at that. But if you want to turn to this dark shaded section, we'll kind of run through it this way. That way you'll have the plan in front of you. It starts on page 73. And I'm going to call up Beverly to walk through the steps of the plan. But if you turn to page 77, that really describes the destination that we're after and the 4 main pillars of areas that we're going to tackle. And then the following pages, 78, 79, walk through the specifics of the plan and the goals that we're trying to meet by meeting those recommendations. So I'll call Beverly Haydel up here. She's been project manager for this plan that really has taken about a year to put together. Regional meetings with stakeholders, extensive surveying of business owners, employers, and again, employing some outside experts to really take a hard look under the hood and say, here's what you're doing right that you need to step up. Here's what you're maybe doing wrong. And here's some very easy things that other states are doing that you could try doing too. So I'll call Beverly up to walk through the specifics of the plan. Thank you, Beverly.
All right. Thank you guys for having me today. As Marie said, my name is Beverly Haydel. I'm based here in Baton Rouge and have my own consulting firm primarily focused on state-level public policy work and government relations services. And I've had the good fortune of working with LABI for a couple of years now in helping them sort of craft their policy platform and then also working for and on their behalf at the state capitol during the legislative session to help bring some of those policy ideas to fruition. As Marie mentioned, we really have been working on this LA23 initiative for about a year now. The concept came to being last fall as we sat down with Stephen Wagasback, who, as you know, was formerly at LABI, is now running for governor, and talked about critical opportunities for 2023. Obviously, with the elections happening next weekend, we know that we're going to have a fresh set of leaders both in the governor's mansion, at the Capitol, all the way down to important boards like the Bessie board that are making policy for our state. And so we really viewed 2023 as a unique opportunity to offer up fresh, innovative, and bold policy solutions that could help get our state back on the right track. And in particular, try to bring our state into a more competitive space with our surrounding states like Texas, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida. You know, we can certainly compare ourselves to other states and other parts of the country, but when it comes to competing for families and jobs, it's really the southern Gulf states that we're in the most direct competition with. And so we started this work, as Marie said, by moving around the state, listening to business leaders, doing small focus groups in different regions of the state, and really trying to understand what are the most pressing issues that are holding back growth for our state. And from those conversations, we saw some important themes emerge. And really, those themes are what informed the 4 pillars of this policy work. And so if you turn to page 77 of the magazine, you'll see the 4 pillars that we really focused on. The first is workforce development and education. As we sat down and talked with business leaders across the state, overwhelmingly, the #1 issue that we heard over and over again was that the lack of a qualified, reliable, talented workforce was really the main issue holding back growth and investment in our state. And part of that is just a numbers game, that we need more people getting up and going to work every day in our state to be competing against states like Texas and Florida that are seeing huge growth in population. But part of it is a skills issue, making sure that we actually have kids coming out of high school, kids coming out of 2- and 4-year institutions that possess the right skill set, be it technical skills or soft skills, to be productive workers for our state employers. And so we spent a lot of time in this report talking about workforce. And necessarily when you talk about workforce, you end up talking about K-12 education. And so as Marie mentioned, we devote an entire sort of deep dive breakout report to K-12 education. The lead kind of author of the main report body was a guy by the name of Ted Abernathy. Ted's based in North Carolina, owns a consulting firm that does work all around the country His largest sort of client type are state chambers of commerce. And so he has a great track record of working with state chambers to develop policy, roadmaps, strategic plans. And he also has a great track of staying with those organizations and helping them implement the plans. And we've actually seen some states, Missouri is one state that he likes to reference, where they developed a plan, they implemented the majority of recommendations in that plan, and they've seen their rankings improve across their economic competitiveness and business climate. For the education piece, we engaged a firm called Watershed Advisors. They are one of the preeminent education reform and education policy consulting firms around the country. They're doing great work in states like Arkansas, where we just saw Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders implement a large package of education reforms. And then on the tax side, of course, you heard from Jason DeQueer at Advantis. That no one knows tax policy better in this state than them. And so I think we were blessed with a great team of consultants to offer up all of the recommendations in the report. Just going back to the key pillars. So I talked about workforce development and education. We also looked at tax and business climate. So in addition to the tax policies that Jason will talk about, things like regulatory environment, legal environment, we know that those are really important, especially for employers that are out of state and looking at whether to relocate into Louisiana and weighing our overall business climate against that of other states. The third pillar is around safety and resiliency. Public safety is one of those issues that I feel like wasn't often talked about in state public policy discourse until the past couple of years, because it has become such an important issue. And as we moved around the state, I would say that one of the things that we came to realize is that public safety has gone from just being a sort of quality of life issue to really being an economic development issue. We have large employers who are expressing frustration that they cannot get workers to want to move to Louisiana or move to certain parts of our state because their families are worried about whether they will be safe there. And so we felt that it was important as an organization, if we're developing a comprehensive strategic plan, that we address public safety. Another issue that we address is healthcare. Healthcare is a very complex topic, and LABI is not going to wade into the details of healthcare policy. But what we do know is that the health of our workforce and the health outcomes of our workforce impacts decisions of employers when they look at whether they want to do business in this state. Part of that is that they need a reliable workforce that will get up and show up every day reliably to work, and part of it is a cost issue. Worse health outcomes lead to higher costs for employers, and so that's another one of those issues that we take on in that section. And then lastly, we talk about economic development, and that section is really focused on looking at whether our state has a sound economic development strategy in place, and then looking at whether our tax incentives and our grant programs and all of the other things that we use to make our state attractive to businesses coming into Louisiana, making sure that those are aligned with a statewide strategic plan and really aligned with the opportunities that our state is best situated to capitalize on. So those are the 4 key pillars of the report. The report contains about 31 very specific, actionable recommendations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all of those recommendations today, but I will hit on a couple of the highlights. And two other things I want to just reference when we talk about sort of how we went about this work. The first is that from the very beginning, we wanted this to be data-driven. And so prior to even undertaking any research or putting pen on paper, Ted and his team, in conjunction with our team at LABI, spent a lot of time digging into the data in terms of how does Louisiana stack up against other states, down to very, very specific metrics. And I'll talk about a couple of those as we move through the report. The other thing that we wanted to do was make sure that we are looking at other best practices around the country. And so for a lot of the recommendations, you will see we have a top-line recommendation, and then we actually reference 2, 3, 4, even more states that are already doing things in that regard. We felt that as quickly as we need to get work done in the state and make progress, we don't have the luxury of time to sit and devise new programs for all of the things that we want to do in this report. And in fact, we shouldn't. That's not the best use of our time. if we know that, for example, Georgia has designed a great program to get more high school kids into apprenticeships, and we think that's a sound policy, let's look at how Georgia is doing it and see if we can take a page from their playbook and bring it to Louisiana. We know that we are a unique state and not everything is going to look the same as it looks in other states, but we want to have a reference point for other states that are already doing good work. And on our website, in fact, we have an entire page that just lists out all the other states that we reference, so you can quickly and easily go to that page and look at some of the states that we think are doing really innovative work as it relates to these policy ideas. So I'm just going to hit on a couple of the key recommendations, and I really want to focus primarily on the workforce and education piece, because I think that is probably, if we're pitting any of this against each other, that is the one where we have the most work to do. And so I'll start by talking about the sort of top line recommendation there. One of the things that we uncovered as we started to look at how our workforce and talent supply systems work in Louisiana is that we have a really fragmented system. We have a lot of state agencies that do workforce development and workforce training, but they are not necessarily all coordinated. They're all working with different pots of federal money. They all have their own guidelines, their own programs. They all have their own set of leadership. And so what we've seen other states do is move to a model where they have one single person, often a cabinet level person within the administration, dedicated solely to the idea of building a better, stronger, more talented and resilient workforce for the state. And that person has the authority and the ability to work with all of the different pots of state funding and develop one coherent plan and roadmap for the state. That person also should be working with regional workforce leaders around the state to make sure that the state plan is coordinated with regional plans. And so that's kind of a structural government reform recommendation in this report. It may not sound the most exciting, but I think it's one of the most important ones. And we talk about some of the states that have moved to that model, and I think they are seeing efficiencies and gains from that type of model. We also talk in here about the importance of our K through 12 system and the accountability system. And I think in terms of all of the education concepts that we throw out in this report, to me, the most important and the most exciting is the one around the high school experience. And we sort of lay out in the report this idea for a reimagined high school experience where we are catching kids as early as their freshman and sophomore year and exposing them to what different careers might look like and exposing them to a couple of different tracks that they may take upon graduation. Now, we know that freshmen and sophomores in high school aren't going to know exactly what they want to be or what the next 5, 10, 15 years of their life look like, but I think they can start being exposed to some of that and wrapping their head around the different options. And then our goal, we believe, should be to sort of tailor-make the experience for those young people. Part of that includes exposing kids to more internship opportunities, apprenticeship opportunities, pre-apprenticeship opportunities, career and technical education training. And the other piece that we talk about is how our accountability system has to line up with those goals for educational outcomes. If we expect our high schools to do more in this regard and develop these different tracks and wrap our kids with career exposure and try to get kids not only graduating with a piece of paper called a diploma, but also a set of skills that prepares them for the workforce, we've got to incentivize our high schools to do that and reward them when they do it well. And so part of what we talk about is how some changes that we need to make to our state accountability system to better align with the workforce goals of the state. The other thing that we talk about in the workforce section is that, you know, part of the solution has to be that we better prepare our young people for the workforce. But another part of the solution has to be that we bring more people overall to the workforce. One of the statistics that I think jumped out at me as we worked on this section of the report is our labor force participation rate. The national average is around 62.5%, and in Louisiana, we're in the low 59s. And while that may not sound like a huge differential in raw numbers, what it means is that we need 110,000 more people waking up and going to a job every day than we currently have in the state. And so we can't get to where we need to be by just better equipping our existing high school students. We've also got to bring more people into the workforce and attract people from out of state to move to Louisiana. And so we have a number of different proposed solutions in here for increasing the number of people in our workforce. That means more and better designed programs for people coming out of incarceration. Our veteran population, we think there's a large opportunity there given the number of bases that we have in Louisiana. And part of it is designing programs that will attract people to Louisiana. We know that we have a low cost of living, which is very attractive. Overall, our tax burden is relatively low compared to a lot of other states. But we saw a lot of states during COVID actually design incentive programs where if someone, a young family, let's say, was looking to move to this state, go into a high demand profession and commit to staying here for a number of years, maybe we help them with a down payment on a house, or maybe we design some incentives to make us a little bit sweeter than Mississippi or Arkansas. We don't embrace one particular model of program, but we do reference several states that have launched these types of programs and seen positive results. So I think that's one of those things where we've not really seen it before in Louisiana, but we think it's worth a try, and it's really going to have to be an all-in approach to workforce development and talent supply for the state if we want to get where we need to go. Any questions on any of the workforce or education stuff before I move on? Yeah, Barbara?
I have a question. We're talking about the apprenticeship programs. You mentioned Georgia. Are there any states that we could look at, you mentioned legislation too, that are K-12 that have the high school component? Is there any legislation around that, or what states would you look at?
In terms of getting more high school students participating in apprenticeships, yeah, I mean, part of the solution there is funding, because right now the State Department of Education actually did get some funding the past 2 years to launch some of these programs for juniors and seniors.
What other states are doing it better?
South Carolina is one that I know of. I know Georgia is doing good things. I can get you some information. I'm not looking at that particular section right here, but
Did that come from John's group, that information?
part of that came from John White's group, and honestly, I would say that when you look nationally at who's doing some of the best practices research on that issue, it's Strata, which is run by Stephen Moray, who we all know well. They have put out a ton of great content on the value of, work-based learning, and so I can share some of those resources with you. I'll jump over real quick to just business climate, and I'll leave all the tax stuff to Jason. But on business climate, the recommendations that you see in here are some of the stuff that LABI has been pushing for and advocating for a number of years, things like greater legal tort reform. LABI was at the forefront in helping lead some of those reform efforts a couple of years ago, but we still think that there is an opportunity to do more. Obviously, a lot of that will depend on who our next set of legislative leaders are and who's on the fourth floor in the governor's office in terms of their appetite for more tort reform. But we do think that there's an opportunity to improve the business climate by going even further in that regard. And I think when you look at what's happening in the property and casualty insurance market, a lot of the solutions there sort of have a tort reform feel to them as well. And so I think there's a lot of overlap that could happen from the policy perspective. One of the recommendations I'll just note on the business climate list is around regulatory reform. It would be very rare, almost unheard of, that you would have a state agency that repealed a regulation. It almost never happens. What we do is every year we just continue adding on, and you end up with a bunch of regulations that really don't have a lot of value anymore, may not even be used, but businesses still have to comply with them. And so as we moved around the state, one of the things that we heard was that there's an appetite from the business community to really, for state government to step back and take a look at all of the regulations that are impacting businesses, and in some cases for small businesses, impacting families directly. And so I think this is one of those recommendations where you don't necessarily need a piece of legislation. You just need leadership on the fourth floor and among the agency heads that they will undertake an effort to review all of their regulations and set a goal of reducing the number of regulations by, let's say, 20-25%. There has been legislation filed to this effect before. It's not gotten across the finish line, but we've seen other states that have moved in this direction. And the business communities have been really receptive and have thought that it makes a difference. I'll jump over, before I turn back to public safety, to economic development. The recommendations in this section really, as I mentioned, all kind of go to this idea that we should take a fresh look at all of the economic development incentive programs that we have as a state. And part of that is to make sure that the ones that we have now continue to have the return on the investment that we originally intended them to have. And part of it is making sure that we have tailor-made incentive programs to capitalize on those opportunities where we think Louisiana is best situated for gains. I've used the energy industry as one example because we know that industry is going through a lot of transformation, and Louisiana is well situated to have a lot of investment and a lot of gains from that industry. But we need to make sure our incentive programs are actually helping us in that regard and helping us attract the jobs and the investments that we're trying to go after. And so I think that is something that, again, goes back to leadership within LED, leadership on the fourth floor, and making sure that we prioritize taking a fresh look at those incentive programs. The last set of recommendations I want to touch on is around public safety. And as it relates to public safety, I think we're well aware that a lot of this work happens at the local level. It's really our local governments that are at the front line of figuring out the right policies, making the right investments in the safety of their communities. But we also think there are some things that can happen at the state level that will support that regional work. The first recommendation we have is just to make sure that we are using our existing resources in the most efficient way to go after the criminals who are having the biggest impact on public safety. And really what that means is making sure that we are tailoring our investments to increase penalties, increase sentences, and go after the habitual repeat offenders. And we know there's a lot of good work being done for nonviolent offenders to get them out of incarceration and get them into work training programs and those types of things. And I think a lot of that work has been good, but we still need continued investment to make sure that we're not letting the other violent, more habitual offenders on the street. The other thing that we recommend is something that LABI has previously published material on, and that's around transparency within the criminal justice system. You know, I think we all recognize that we have elected judges, that's here to stay. But if people are going to be going out and voting for judges, we believe that they deserve to know what the judges are doing. And part of that is knowing which judges are setting low bails, which judges are letting repeat offenders back on the streets. Same thing goes for district attorneys, which ones are prosecuting violent criminals and which ones are not. And so it's much more complex than that. We have a number of recommendations both in this report, but also in the series of reports that LABI has previously published specifically around that topic. And then the last issue that we hit on in the public safety section is around mental health and just acknowledging the relationship between mental health services and mental health investments and our public safety. And I think there's a lot of good work being done around the state, including here in Baton Rouge through facilities like the Bridge Center for Hope, where local governments in partnership with nonprofits have made investments in mental health services that can support our law enforcement officers. We think there's a model there that can be replicated and scaled, and I think the state has to be part of that solution. And so that's something we recommend in the report as well. So I'm going to pause there with talking about content. I could go on and on and on, and there's a ton of material in this report. But I would encourage you, particularly on the education deep dive, if education policy and the overlap of that and workforce is of interest to you, that breakout report contains a lot of amazing content, and honestly content that I think is new content, things that you might not necessarily have heard before. And I could spend an hour talking about the education policy piece, but things like how do we attract more teachers to the profession? Obviously, pay is part of that, but part of it is looking at some of the innovative things other states have done to attract and retain teachers. Things like early childhood education, higher ed. So we go into all of that in the education deep dive, and I would just encourage you to take a look at that. It's not available in the printed form, but it is available online. Yeah. Oh.
So in 2017, and I am not remembering off the top of my head whether LABI officially endorsed the criminal justice overhaul
Sure.
Are you all with this plan talking about rolling back some of those law changes from that era?
No, I don't think necessarily. I mean, I do think that we think it makes sense to really dig into the data and look at each of those individual policy changes to make sure that they're having the intended effect. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that we're proposing rolling back any of that. Hi.
Look, it's great. You know, Catholic Charities is all about working with people in poverty, and we look at social determinants of health, right? You cover some of it, mental health, education. But when we're looking at wages, and from a pro-life perspective, if we were to raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour, that would help thousands of women, pregnant women, parenting women. Where is the common ground? Arkansas passed, I don't know what their wage is right now. Where is it? That's not the panacea, but it's part of the solution. Is there a common ground we could reach in the next session on raising the wage?
Look, I don't want to speak for the new CEO of LABI. I can put that one to him. But look, I think that what we believe is that a lot of the stuff that we've laid out in this plan will create greater opportunity and more job opportunities and high-paying jobs that where the minimum wage is not an issue. And I think LABI has always taken the approach that imposing more mandates isn't necessarily the way to go, especially as it relates to small businesses. But I do think that we are on the same page that our goal as a state should be more jobs that pay a good salary and a good wage to workers so that they have more opportunities. So I certainly think there's common ground to be had.
As a over two-decade member of LABI, I want to thank you for getting a report out from around 1970s and renaming it for today. If we look at LSU, you see a picture of 5 kids. 1 was from out of state, 4 Louisiana educated. Today, that picture would be 4 kids and only 3 in Louisiana being educated. They want to leave the state at a higher rate than they did when there were 5. And that other one, you certainly don't expect them to stay here. That's just a fundamental bottom line, and I've seen it before. Thank you.
Yeah, yes.
I'm looking at the brochures, and my family's always been very involved with LABI. But I'm looking at all these, and it's not one word about the environment. And it was being an outdoorsman and everything. I thought that should be at least your word. But when you include safety and resilience, you're talking about law and order. But what about the safety of people that are around these businesses? What about the safety of the people working? We work having a hard time getting workers. And I just thought it should be, even if it's a small portion, it should be. Didn't mention the environment, not one time. Not one time. Doctors,
No, look, I think that's, of course, an important issue, especially as it relates to some of the industries you mentioned. But unfortunately, we couldn't address every single issue in this report. We're already at, I think, 200 pages. So, but look, I think we agree that's an important issue. Yes.
I'm a little confused. Who is your customer, and how would you rate your success from the previous year?
In terms of who is the audience for this report, or how are we going to measure success of this plan?
Who is your customer for this study?
I think our customer is every single Louisiana resident and every single Louisiana business owner.
How do you then take that and decide if you're doing a good job or a bad job?
Excellent
or are you
question.
making any difference in your work?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. So I'd say that the client is anyone who's in a position to make a difference. Some of these, as Representative Freiberg knows, I think this is her 3rd time hearing this report, some of these are legislative tasks. Some of them are for Bessie. Some of them are for Board of Regents. Some of them are really for the next governor as they're setting the tone with their cabinet level decisions and their transition team to decide what kind of structure they're going to put in place to allow some of these things to happen. And some of them are private sector. we met with the Chamber of Commerce executives, and especially on that, and I can't tell you how important this is and what a reaction we've had as we bring this around the state, that early exposure to career options. That's something the private sector can come in and provide. The Thibodeau Chamber of Commerce is starting as early as 8th grade, bringing folks in from the community just to let students know what opportunities are in that backyard. Because once they get into high school, that's where you start losing people. And I'll tell you from myself, I'm from Abbeville. I'm from Vermilion Parish. There wasn't a lot of corporate life, career options presented to me as a young student growing up in Abbeville. I accidentally stumbled upon journalism later. Thank goodness I did. I loved it. But it's not something necessarily that was modeled for me as I was growing up. So in terms of tracking our success, there are some key things. If you turn to page 80, there are 10 indicators that we're going to look at to see if we're on track. It's things like literacy levels. It's things like employment rates, our rankings. Are we moving up? Are we moving the needle? And so those are the things that we're going to actually keep checking and check back in on to make sure that we're doing right. And have the conversations. Again, the client are the people in charge of making these decisions. Are we helping them to make sure that they're being able to implement some of these ideas?
David, why don't you go ahead?
I was going to ask, so the cabinet level sort of workforce guru, czar that you're proposing. So how is that role different from current head of the Louisiana Workforce Commission? Would that person answer to this new job?
I don't think we propose any particular org chart or reporting structure. I do think obviously there would be overlap with our existing LWC director, but I think when you look at what LWC is doing, that is not the entire picture of what's happening as it relates to workforce funding and workforce training in the state. As I mentioned, there are a bunch of other agencies that are doing work that butts up against LWC. And what we've seen is there's, in a lot of cases, a lack of communication, a lack of data sharing, a lack of sort of getting on the same page strategically. And so I think this person would sit on top of those agencies as a separate role that coordinates all of those efforts.
I guess LED would be one of the other ones. Are there others that you'd like to mention in terms of have major roles?
I mean, yeah, DCFS, DOE, Workforce Commission, LED. I mean, I would venture to say that almost every single state agency is doing some type of workforce training. I mean, we even see LDH now doing a lot around allied health training and healthcare education. So I think there's really an opportunity to pull from what's happening within all of those agencies and create a more organized, cohesive unit within state government.
Let's see, you and then you, please.
This key takeaways wish list of 11 items. Have you identified the things that may be structural impediments to achieving these, such as the lowest minimum wage, the combination of lowest minimum wage, highest sales taxes in the country?
Sure. I mean, look, I think for any one of these recommendations, we can come up with a laundry list of things that are impediments right now. I think, though, we seek to remove a lot of those impediments through other recommendations in the report. And I think, in terms of how we prioritize what's in this report, a lot of that's going to come down to leadership and us sitting down with the next governor, with the next set of elected officials, and figuring out which ones they see the most opportunity for immediate change on. So I think that is how we will prioritize this list and hopefully work with them to remove some of those barriers.
Let me go back to my question a little bit. At the end of the year, do you give a grade to the leaders, the governor, the legislature, the parish government? Do you give any grades? Do you give feedback? Yes. Do you actually got a grade
Scorecard?
A to F, basically?
You can talk about the scorecard.
We have a legislative scorecard that we do annually, and you'll see it. It's actually in here, kind of towards the beginning of the magazine. But if you're asking us to grade more elected officials, I think we'd be happy to.
Well, I think you need to go to the board on the state.
Yes.
Yes.
Got to get down
But I will say,
with the parish and that kind of thing. The school system. What
And-
do you grade the school system?
We don't do that right now.
Got to get real feedback.
Yes, and on that point, part of us putting out this voter guide was, are we asking the right questions of all of these people who are knocking on your door and asking for your vote? are we giving them a pass, or are we really asking them, what is your plan? Are you being specific? And are you keeping these things in mind as we go about? So thank you for that question. Yes.
It's not so much of a campaign issue right now, nor is it probably one of the historic factors, because I'm sure everybody that LABI supported, LABI's way. But what I am asking about is the industrial tax exemption program and the changes that were sought in 2022 by State Senator Rouge's Pope with Senate Bill 151, which was vigorously opposed by your organization. And it's not so much of a campaign issue now because all of the people running for governor have now come around to saying, they would probably just leave things as they are. But my question is, do you believe that LABI would again oppose a governor, or this elected governor, keeping into place the governor's executive orders, which left local control to some extent, especially in Cancer Act?
Jason. I'm bringing up our resident ITEP expert.
Yeah, I'll start before he gets here by saying there is an ITEP component to these recommendations, and you won't see LABI saying, no, take government control, local government control away. We think that's here to stay. What we are saying is there needs to be some sort of uniformity and predictability so that local governments who are making these decisions have the tools they need and the methodology to do this well. If they're going to be economic development partners, let's make sense of that. And that is something that our outside experts say, yeah, we agree, you've got to fix this. I'll bring Jason up.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Jason DeQueer with Advantage Consulting. And so I've heard two tax questions. I'm going to kind of give the answer. One of your other questions was about the highest sales tax rate in the country. We absolutely have that. And the only way we're going to get a lower sales tax rate is if we fix our system. Right now, it's us in Colorado who do not have a centralized sales tax collection system, and for that reason, we're missing revenues that are due to the state of Louisiana. You have smaller and remote businesses popping up all over the country, and they're refusing to collect and remit to Louisiana because they don't believe that our system is constitutional. We are also looking in this report at digital goods and digital transactions. Sales tax is based off of tangible personal property. Now things that were being transacted through its tangible form are being transacted through the cloud and other different softwares, and for that reason, we're not collecting the sales tax on those because our code is not modernized, it's not set up to do that. And if we can do that, expand the base, build out an administrative system that allows us to collect all the revenues that are due to us, we could also lower the rate and stop us from having one of the highest combined sales tax rates in the country. As for ITEP and the Rogers-Pope bill, the concern there is when you're going through and you're looking at a lot of these recommendations that need to be made, you run into constitutional barriers. LABI was not against local input. In fact, in this report, it actually basically says that we need to give our local governments more resources so that they can understand how to do a ROI study for ITEP, develop processes that are more uniform. As we know, Texas has a similar program called Chapter 313 that the locals give input to and also approve, but it's uniform throughout all the counties in Texas. Whereas right now, we have rules that are being developed in New Orleans, different from Lake Charles, different from other parts of the state, and it creates a chilling effect on businesses coming through who are applying and want to receive approval because the rules are different from each way. And the concern is if you take all of this and put it in the Pope bill and put it in the Constitution, and it doesn't work out, it's not uniform, it's too hard to make those changes once it's in there. And so, in terms of the executive order, the current governor was able to do that by creating the executive order. The Department of Economic Development wrote rules, and I think it'll be up to the next governor, whoever that may be, to decide, hey, how can we create more uniformity and consistency with that program. And that could be modifying the executive order, it could be changing it, it could be working with LED to promote better rules and more streamlined rules.
I know that we're coming on the end of our lunch hour. Julia, do you have a question?
I did have one, sort of similar to Mr. Moscone. I rarely do this, but I'm going to talk about
There is. That is the final pillar when we look at safety and resiliency. And that's why, because you're right, it is an economic, a barrier to economic development. And I'm going to call your attention. There are lots of charts and graphs in this report and statistics. My favorite one is on page 90. And this is another Louisiana's 49th. This is a list of states in order of remote workforce. So post-COVID, I work from home. I can work anywhere. So does my husband. I don't know if any of you in the room do, but there's a whole workforce out there of people who can live and work anywhere. They're not choosing to live here. And so that, when we look at a modern economy and who we're servicing, that is something to keep in mind. So as this plan gets implemented and we look at things like the cost of insurance, the cost of, housing, things, all of these things, the availability of affordable housing, all of that fills into it.
We talk about broadband. Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, I think similar to your husband's business brain.
Yeah.
And the internet goes out and it's like, then he has to tell people.
Then you're done.
Yeah.
Country, like, hey, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. We certainly touch on broadband access in this report in the infrastructure section.
So yes, you're right. That's all definitely part of what factors into people deciding to be here. We'll have to, I think this is probably going to be the last one.
Have you been given a copy of the traffic management plan by DOT for I-10 widening in Baton Rouge?
I have not, but I went through I-10 widening in the Lafayette area, and it's definitely a headache. It's
Yeah, I don't think we have seen that full study, but
Nothing compared to what's going to happen here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, guys, I think we're done.
Yeah.
With our lovely women representing LABI plus
Thank you.
Jason.
Thank y'all so much. We really appreciate the time, and just direct you to la23.org for more. Thanks.